When 17-year-old Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz caught her first glimpse of the London palace that was to be her home in 1761, she turned pale. She was set to become Queen of Great Britain and Ireland within hours, but she had never set foot in England or met her husband-to-be. Let's unfold the fascinating story of Princess Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Born in 1744 in Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a duchy located in present-day northern Germany, the princess had an unremarkable childhood in what other members of the European aristocracy considered to be a mediocre and provincial dukedom. However, this unassuming background would play to her advantage when a far-off prince ascended to the throne. In 1760, George's grandfather died, making him King of England, and making his unmarried status a matter of national alarm. George needed a wife, and he needed one fast. His advisors decided, and they mounted a desperate search for a Protestant princess to share his life and sire an heir. Charlotte was unknown and thought to have no political connections or aims. This was seen as a plus by George's political advisors, who wanted British interests to prevail after the king's marriage. Consequently, though George had never met Charlotte, in 1761 an emissary proposed marriage on his behalf. Charlotte accepted, and the arranged marriage took place just 6 hours after the young princess arrived in England. Although Charlotte neither spoke English nor had met her spouse prior to their wedding day, she now held the title of Queen of Great Britain and Ireland. Everyone wanted to greet the new king and queen at their coronation, so many well-wishers crowded them that it took 2 hours for their procession to make it from the street into Westminster Abbey. Less than a year later, on the 12th of August, 1762, Charlotte gave birth to her first child, George Augustus, Prince of Wales, who would later become King George IV. Over the course of her lengthy marriage, she would give birth to a total of 15 children. By all reports, the king and queen had an unusually happy marriage, and George III was a devoted father and husband. Nevertheless, court life presented challenges for Charlotte. She clashed with her mother-in-law over the rigid protocols of British aristocracy and found the pressure to bear numerous heirs draining. By the time she had borne 14 of her 15 children, she wrote that, "I don't think a prisoner could wish more ardently for his liberty than I wish to be rid of my burden." Though Charlotte struggled with the boredom and confinement of court life, she found her own ways to deal with the crushing expectations of her new role. A year following her marriage, George acquired a substantial country estate previously owned by the Dukes of Buckingham. This estate later became known as Buckingham House, which was referred to as the Queen's House. And there Charlotte embraced a comfortable domestic existence, engaging in activities like reading, needlework, and playing the harpsichord. She shared a love of botany and plants with her husband, who became known as Farmer George due to his agricultural interests. Her interest in botany led to the magnificent South African flower, the bird of paradise, being named Strelitzia reginae in her honor. Queen Charlotte is also credited to have introduced the German tradition of Christmas trees to England and had the first one in 1800. However, the couple's happiness did not last. In 1765, George experienced a bout of mental illness so serious that his ministers proposed having Charlotte temporarily take the throne while the king was incapacitated. Though the king soon recovered, he experienced relapse after relapse, and eventually it became clear his mental illness would not pass. The king experienced mania, depression, hallucinations, and convulsions, and historians report that he attacked and even sexually assaulted members of his family. These bouts of illness greatly devastated the queen. The queen was almost overpowered with some secret terror. As time passed, the bouts turned into lengthy episodes, and the king was isolated and even incarcerated. During this era, societal stigma and lack of understanding of mental illness meant it was nearly impossible to help the mad king or gain the kind of support now regarded as key for the caretakers and loved ones of people with mental illness. Ultimately, Charlotte's son George took over the throne as regent. But her husband would remain ill for the rest of his life, and by 1789 the Queen's hair had turned white under the stress of the King's sickness. When Charlotte died in 1818, her husband was so sick to the point where he could not even understand that his wife was dead. Today, Charlotte is primarily remembered as a devoted wife and a tragic figure connected with the King's mental illness. But some see her as noteworthy for another reason. They claim she was Great Britain's first black or biracial queen. For decades, historians have debated whether Charlotte's ancestral ties to Portuguese aristocracy mean she had brown skin. Those who believe she had black ancestry point to portraits that show what they describe as African features, and say other depictions of the time that show the Queen as light-skinned would have been hiding her ancestry to conform with the era's Eurocentric beauty ideals. But others say the Queen's ancestry was so distant it likely did not affect her looks, and argue that modern conceptions of race are what's driving the belief that Charlotte was black. Since it's impossible to determine how Charlotte really looked in real life, the argument will likely never be settled. Nor will public interest in Charlotte's life, as evidenced by the new Netflix limited-run series, which has gained fans, charmed reviewers, and drawn newfound attention to the tragic Queen's life. But as narrator Julie Andrews says in the show itself, it is fiction inspired by fact.